So by our standards, this is a good morning, and I am based in Venice, in Los Angeles, and I have Pedro and Philip with me. Pedro's in the San Fernando Valley, Philip's in Orange County. We are local to one another, but we are coming together on Zoom to talk simultaneously and record this for the ears that are open in the world who want to listen and hear what we have to say and think about in relation to the mental obsession, the central issue with respect to all addictions, all reactive, impulsive, and addictive behaviors, are outflows or consequences, symptoms of mentally obsessive thoughts. And we get together weekly to discuss this in a small group and have for a long time, and decided to make it available to anyone else who's interested in listening who may be suffering from the same thought process. And it isn't a requirement that you think you suffer from this to listen and maybe see some things you might not otherwise think about or consider that may be plaguing you. One of the primary issues with mentally obsessive thinking is thinking about things that we don't think we're thinking about, and thinking we're not thinking things we're thinking about, and wondering how things happen that seem to be out of our control, while we've just basically developed a form of denial and pretense that gives us impressions that aren't true and accurate. And again, the idea of lies being central to the mentally obsessive thought process reveals itself. So we get together to do this with you, and Pedro and Philip are here to join us today. Both of these gentlemen I've known for, I think, Philip 10 years, I think Pedro a little shorter than that, but we've had a lot of time to talk, and we hope you appreciate the opportunity. We appreciate your listening, and if there are any questions you have or topics you'd like to focus on, there's an email in the contact section of the episode list that you're welcome to use, and we will respond as quickly as we can and address whatever you send to us in any way that we can. So anyway, good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Jack. We know each other for over 15 years.
Is it 15? Time is becoming more vaporous in my experience. Wow.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me, and I hope I can bring something useful for whoever listens.
Well, Pedro, you certainly have in my experience, and I don't expect my experience would be limited to only, your value would be limited to my experience. And so I appreciate you coming. And Philip, you too. I see you sitting in the sun in Orange County, and the weather's gotten a little nicer, so I appreciate that. It warms me while I'm sitting inside a somewhat colder building. But, between the two of you, we've had a lot of conversations about issues that have been difficult and yet also productive in terms of our own growth and our own realizations. And my experience has been those conversations is what lead me out of that thing I call myself, that I can feel trapped in, by simply starting to see that my insight often comes from what I witness other people doing, and they offer me the perspective I'm not always willing to have for my own experience. And so I appreciate you guys for all of that. And one of the reasons you're here is because of that, the value that I put in both of you and the appreciation that I have for the time we've spent. So good morning.
Morning. Thank you, Jack. Thanks for having me.
So last week, there were two questions left behind by Everett and Michael. And not that we're required to stay on these, but just to introduce the ideas they ended with after their trilogy of episodes. The first was, Everett asked about expansion and contraction, what the difference was. How do you stimulate, and or what is how are those consequences? What are they consequences of? And Michael asked, how do you stay on course? How, as a course is found, and I think that came up once before in a question that was, how do you stay on the path? And both of those questions are obviously lead-ins to discuss this at any length in any direction, because it all seems to lead to the same essential issues, which are either we are being honest about what's happening and accurately assessing it, or we're not being honest about it and inaccurately assessing it and making believe those inaccurate assessments are true and real, and ending up in a sense of conflict that doesn't seems to be happening to us rather than being caused by us. And ultimately, that's the root of the issue. Now, it fractures in many different ways, as we all know, because when we have experiences, they seem to be a little more difficult, a little easier to take care of other people with their experiences than it often is to have our own experience and the impact of that experience and not take it in a way that makes it difficult to let go of and have any perspective on. And yet the perspective in our discussion comes from the discussions we have.
Well, I think it's interesting in those two questions. There's two hot topics that come up, which are inherent in those questions, which is awareness and judgment. And for me, I look at that contracting or expansion, or how do I stay on course? One, I have to be aware, am I on course? Am I off course? Am I aware of, am I contracting or I'm expanding in my conversations or in my life, you could say. And both of them are put up to this judgment that I feel like a lot of people have, which is like this universal yardstick that we're always defining and molding, and it's different for every person, but at the same time, we think everyone has the same standards. So I don't know. For me, it just that really those two questions highlighted awareness and judgment. And we were talking a little bit earlier about division and separation. So for me, I just it's interesting because I think those questions, in a way, they almost separate myself from myself, you know?
Well, and I would suggest you're really noting the absolute awareness you have it doesn't even have a path because it's everywhere. It doesn't have a path to get there because it can't be nowhere if it's everywhere. So it must be wherever we are. And secondly, awareness or judgment would be just beginning to have thoughts about that may not be accurate. And that's easy to do as a human. It's probably as common a thing as we do all day long. So
for me, the question about expansion and contraction, and the question about how to stay on the path are not, I don't know if I understand them, because when I am breathing, is my lungs expanding or contracting? Or expanding and contracting is the same thing or the function? So to put labels, I am not sure that's the way. It's confusing to me.
Well, it would be hard to discuss this without labels, but I would say you hit it on the button, Pedro, in that you were identifying the idea that opposites are actually inherently part of the same thing. That if we're breathing in, we're preparing to breathe out. And without the exhale, we'd never breathe in. And without the inhale, we'd never breathe out. So that contraction and expansion is a typical standard throughout the universe. I mean, all of the stars are creating heat and they expand. And when they cool, they begin to condense and contract a little bit. And as they contract, they get hotter and they expand, and they do that same breathing technique effectively.
Yeah. Regarding staying on the path, well, paraphrasing you, Jack.
Yes, sir.
If the absolute is absolute, how the hell can you get out of the path?
Exactly. So you're pointing to the fact that the questions are typically asked about human experience, not about being, right? And then interestingly, if the concession is made that we are sort of know-it-alls in the all-knowing sense, in a being sense, then there aren't any issues with that can be questioned. And if they are questioned, they're not being questioned about that. They're being questioned about our thinking about that. Would that make sense?
Again, it's about separation. I am in the path and you are not. Or I am not in the path and you are.
Yes.
As we start talking at the beginning, I am Latino. No. I am Hispanic. No, 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 I am Mexican American. No, 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 I am Tex-Mex. No, 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 I am whatever. So just breaking in pieces the reality maybe is very gratifying for our ego, but I don't think that is the path of truth.
Then gratification for ego is extinction, because it's on a hell-bent course to use pain as justification for its existence. And if what we know is wrong are things that hurt, we know ego by taking ego seriously and making believe that what we think is who we are, we end up creating the pain we use to end up suffering. And very often that leads to addictions that kill us and or suicide.
In there.
It's a precursor. So, but you're hitting on the absolute point, Pedro, that this historic tendency of relying on thought as being our primary and exclusive source has led us to individuate so that we can create groups of people we feel more or less comfortable with and blame other people who aren't the people we feel comfortable with for the problems we have, and end up creating the conflicts that we end up suffering from by thinking we're separate when in fact we're not. And I would say that's the history of war in our, 92% of modern history has had a war going on somewhere on earth.
And it's done for a profit. It's done for a profit because
An agenda.
there is a belief, a story that we have created and we have believed in part of humanity. It happens to be the dominant part of humanity that has more power or resources in the world, that basically said, God will tell you if you are good by giving you success, money, and material possessions. That Calvinist Protestant attitude towards how I know I am living a rightful life equals, if I am successful, I am doing good. And in order to be successful, we have created anything that we need to create, separation, etc., to achieve that. So it's always a material interest behind that separation, in my opinion. You know what I mean, Phil?
I do. There's always some agenda that someone is creating some type of, how would I say, some kind of cultural label or conversation that the general public can believe in and justify whatever actions are taken by whoever has the power. And I think, it was interesting because I was hoping that we would talk about this, but these agendas and all this stuff become cultural identification points. They become stories that we believe are us, when really, they're just an ego identification of us rather than going down to the beingness of who we are. Absolutely. And how can I say this? It's and that's where a lot of us get lost, is when we're trying to come to a place where we're trying to live, say, by spiritual principles or a different way of life than what we've learned in the regular day-to-day societal and cultural norms. We have a lot of stories that have been created in our own psyche that really sometimes have nothing to do with us, but can be traced back all the way back to these agendas that someone in power had at some point in, 1492. And we believe they're our own stories, but really they're just passed down generation to generation. And in a way, they kind of separate us and get us away from our absolute nature.
Well, and
sorry, yeah.
We can't get away from our absolute nature, and we talk about it in those terms because of the history of this thinking being so pervasive that cultures have been built around it and appear to be doing exactly what we each do in our own thinking process and end up reflecting that on a mass scale, which is why social ills are ills, because individuals get together on a collective basis with mental illness, or they're struggling with a mental problem, and then they convene in a larger group to make believe, because the group is large enough, that they finally have a place to fit and belong, while they've always fit and belonged. But now they're thinking in terms of what they think, and those are basically cultures that have developed. Now, there's nothing wrong with cultures, but the idea that they're true enough and real enough to use as a pretext to begin to kill other cultures is largely what's threatened humans through our experience. And I would suggest that what we're describing right now is this historic misuse of thinking that's gone on as long as modern history, as long as I can tell, has been going on. It's simply an addiction to thought, as though it is absolutely our only source, and ending up creating the sense of separation that then convenes to convene other opinions that are simultaneous. And the only reason they're getting together is because they're all wrong, looking for a vote in mass quantity to claim their right.
This idea that I was pointing before, that success will bring happiness, and obviously the union with God, that peace will be the ultimate happiness, right? It's very engraved in our personal psyche and in the global psyche. It's a story that, as at least the Occidental world has believed to the T. It's a story that we all have agreed. Like, we have agreed that a piece of paper called money means food or means shelter. But it's just a piece of paper. We just have agreed that that will buy us this or that. So we have agreed that success is what will bring happiness. And in my experience, when I was praying, and for many years of my life, I was praying to get this, to get that, to get this. I think as a society, we were in a way pursuing that idea that one day, when we achieve success, everybody will be happy. And the question is, when enough is enough? When is success rich? It's never rich. When do you have enough money? You never have enough money. When do you have enough sex? You never have enough sex. When do you have enough prestige? You never have enough prestige. So this idea, again, rooted in the Protestant, especially in the Calvinist philosophy, that God will reward me if I am good, is what is a big block that we have to peer through and remove, to really see what is going on in our lives and as a community and as a race.
I suspect it started a lot earlier too than Calvin and Luther and all the recent characters that said what they said and did what they did to galvanize a new group of people who felt independent from the whole because they were relying on newer ideas because the old ones had gotten stale. Anything that can get rotten is potentially rotten the whole time.
No, but when before Calvin this started? I don't know.
Well, in the Old Testament, there's stories of Job was a story of God taking everything from Job to prove he was faithful and then giving it all back. And I think that goes back 5,000 years. And there's some evidence in old cultures that these were things that were used, again, to subject people to an idea that the whatever the authority was an authority representing a God that had them behave certain ways to be able to qualify for its grace.
No,
And
but
we still think in those terms.
But one thing is the authority represents God, and another thing is, frankly, God tells me that I am right because I am having success. That's two different things, Jack. In my
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
But it's gone on for a long time, and my sense is that that's the exact thing you were just describing, Pedro, with respect to enough never being enough. When enough isn't enough, it's because it's trying to fill something that has no bounds. You can't fill an infinite space with more and more and more and more and ever feel fulfilled, because the infinite space wouldn't allow anything to occupy it, because it's infinite. There is no end to it. And the idea that thinking is our only source turns us into these historic belief systems that puts us in conflict, not because other people are treacherous and horrible, but because our own misdeeds are so horrifying to us that if we don't accept we're doing it, we immediately jump to the conclusion that it's other people and other places and other things, and even use God to justify the conflicts we have and the justification to kill other people in the name of this seemingly infinite power that now has unleashed itself on other humans because of the pettiness of my own thinking. To leap over my own involvement and blame the universe and the world for being imperfect when it's my own imperfect thinking is a big step to take that makes no sense at all, and yet has seemed to make sense for eons and millennia. And I think we're pointing to the fact that this condition, this discussion, is pointing to something that hasn't been talked about openly as a core human issue. It has been seen only through the dereliction of people who are overtly addicted as being limited to them, so that people could continue to think that they are separate from it and not part of it, simply by disclaiming their own internal dialogue as being something that's right, when in fact a lot of it is wrong.
You are looking at it from way, way above. I am looking at it in my little experience with the feet in the ground. And when I thought that the day I have $10,000, all my problems will go away, the day I have $10,000, then I thought that the day I have $100,000, my problems will go away. Then when I have $100,000, I thought, well, no, the problem is that I don't have $1 million, and so on, and so on, and so on. What I am trying to communicate, Jack, is that the idea that something outside will bring me happiness, and ultimately the connection with that God that will provide sense and meaning and peace in my life, that road is never end.
Of course. You know why?
Of course, because yes, I know why. But what I want is to to break down this illusion, because I think it is very important to really be aware, as Philip was talking before, of this situation in our minds, because it's deeply ingrained, not only in us, but in society as a whole. So it is very difficult to get out of it when everything around you is pointing in this direction. Material success will give you that peace, that connection, that happiness.
But in the same sense, on the same sense that some of us sense about what everyone else is doing is the same attempt we're using to avoid what we're each doing, because I would suggest that it isn't hard to stop, it's hard to maintain it. The hardness has been the edges we've all maintained individually to support the contentions culturally and globally that it's impossible to stop because of what everyone else is doing, rather than start to sit in the seat and say, it's what I'm doing now and thinking it's hard because of them, when I'm actually insisting I continue thinking what's hard is about them, and rather than starting to see that it's actually easy for me to say, oh, if I'm the one promoting the thought, I am the one dead center of the problem. And if I am responsible by nature, because existence would suggest responsibility, provided existence, not irresponsibility, then I am responsible for those thoughts and maintaining those thoughts globally. And to talk about it, I'm not suggesting that your conversation regarding the details isn't valuable, because if someone's in that mindset that they think that's all that's happening and can't understand how to get out of it, the reminder is to suggest that the in it is delusional and it's a lie. And they're all ideas that are perpetuating, that are addictive in the sense that they constantly react to the reaction and keep this chronic notion going, that we look into the world and say, what's wrong with the world? While we're actually still maintaining the ideas within our own thoughts.
So one thing I would say is kind of bridge the gap between both of you guys in this conversation is, when we look at this fundamental idea of material success, and if I get quote unquote this and that, God loves me, or I'm a chosen one of God, if I get this amount of success or I get this amount of fame, I think inherent in those is, let's look at the duality of abundance and scarcity. Do people believe, they're the chosen ones if they believe in an abundant universe, or do they believe in a scarcity universe? And we can look at things in time, especially with war. I mean, look at what's happening in the Ukraine. I mean, obviously, in some mentality in Russia, or in the government of Russia, is thinking that they are not whole and complete without Ukraine, and they have to go and get it. And then there's all these other things that happen with it that are more layers, but I'm not going to get into all that. But the simple point is, if we believe that there's an absolute, and that in its inherent nature, there is no scarcity of it. It's abundant and absolute. It's universal. It's here all the time. However, over time, we have believed in scarcity more than we have believed in abundance, and that it has to be this win-lose. I pull this over you. I need to, dominate you or whatever. But the point is, I can speak to my specific experience. One of my professions, I work with people who are very high net worth individuals. I mean, they're worth billions of dollars, and they have a kid or a child who's suffering from addiction or alcoholism, and their money is completely useless. And everything that they've done to win to that point, to get to that point, they realize they're completely powerless over their child's addiction. So I think what's important to highlight there is, like, it doesn't matter what kind of money or all that stuff they've been able to achieve to that point. They, at a certain point, have admitted that they're powerless and they need help from people who have more experience. And usually, we were talking about these conversations of people who, when you say you go into a 12-step program, one of the reasons it works is because people who used to think they're all alone in their addiction start to identify and see that they're not all alone, and that actually the same type of thoughts and patterns of behavior that they've had, other people have, and they've recovered from those thoughts and behaviors. And the only way for them to heal is to basically believe in something that's absolute, of their own definition, of their own personal way that they're going to connect with it. It doesn't matter. It just has to be something that is not them, and something greater than them.
Okay,
Mhm.
No, I'm sorry.
It's really, Philip, it's really greater than they think they are. That concept is just getting people beyond their thought of who they are, not actually who they are.
Yes.
It's introducing them to an awareness they have that simply transcends the perpetual thinking about who they think they are and thinking about thinking as their only source. So that gets to this issue about substance. We can't fill the void when the void has to do with a thought that has no substance. There's no way to fix it by trying to fill a bucket with an empty bottom that doesn't have a bottom. It's just going to pour through it constantly because it doesn't have any impact, because it's like starving and watching people eat in a movie, trying to solve starvation through watching people eat in a movie. It's that same sort of disconnect. When I think, and you think, and we think that our source is stuff, material stuff, as Pedro pointed out, that our source is only our body, and our source is only our senses, and our source is only the stuff we can get our hands on, we are mistaken. And mistaking things as true put us at odds with what seems like reality, when in fact we're only at odds with our own thoughts.
All right, let me bring my own experience into this.
We'll get back to you, Phillip.
Forget about success and money and all of that, but let's talk about happiness. Why I start drinking? Because I was unhappy. I want something better. And I pray, I meditate and I pray, but I was not happy. So I keep drinking more and more and more until the thing start becoming a big issue. I am not happy because I am drinking. So I went to recovery. I went to AA. But why I really went to AA? I went to AA to be happy. In the same way that I was praying to be happy. In the same way that I was drinking to be happy. The question is, I am happy already. I just have to accept it. And if the absolute is absolute, that gives me tremendous amount of comfort. So it's nothing else to do but to be happy. It's not about praying. It's not about meditating. It's not about getting sober. It's not, because if all those things that I was doing it for the wrong reason, and the wrong reason is to be happy when I am already happy, it's like, hello, that makes no sense. I don't know if I am explaining myself, Jack, but
no, I think you're making the point that I was listening to a show last night in Italian, and I don't really know Italian, but I was reading and I kept seeing that whenever happy came up in Italian, it's contente. And if you think of content, when our thoughts have no content because they have no substance, and we're making believe lies have no substance and we're making believe they're true, there's no content. And if the word happiness is based on contentedness, discontentedness would be an indication that we have no substance in what we're relying on. And there's an absence of that. That distraction doesn't mean that there isn't content in an absolute state of being. It simply means my thinking is preoccupied with things, just as you're describing, Pedro, just as you're describing. When my thinking is thinking things that aren't happening are all that's happening, I obviously create an experience that's haunting and fearful because I'm not even witnessing what's happening, and I'm aware of it enough to know those feelings. And then what do? Treat the feeling by thinking I can get away from the feeling rather than actually surrender or concede the cause of that feeling, which is in my thought. If I have a real fear, I know what to do. I'm going to run. I'm going to get away. I'm going to fight. I'm going to do things that don't require thinking. But in that other vein, when I'm doing things within my own thinking that I don't think I'm doing that are causing the problem, I think what I need to do is get away from them rather than, and while I get away, I'm taking them with me wherever I go. There's no escape from it as long as I maintain it. And that's the mental obsession. That's the core issue that you're describing. Yeah. It isn't because there's a lack of abundance. It's because my thought lacks any substance. You can't have a scarce thought that's so scarce not to really even exist other than in my own imagination and not express scarcity. And that's pretty much been a human endeavor. And again, it points to the fact that this has been a human problem.
I think it's very dangerous to pay attention to how I feel. Oh, I am not feeling good today. Or not to pay attention. It's important to pay attention to the feelings, to be aware of them. It's very dangerous to follow those and said, oh, I am not feeling well today, or I feel great today. When I go to meetings and people share, today I have this feeling that I said, that's very dangerous, because if you paying that attention to your feeling, one thing is to be aware, another thing is to pay attention, is the feeling can take you with. It's like seduce you into believe that is true.
Well, I disagree. First of all, because not completely, Pedro, but if we're going to look at a certain point, like let's say a 12-step context, at a certain point, there's a place, I believe it's step 10, it talks about how our thinking will be more on the plane of inspiration. So I think, when we first go through certain practices to get well, we can't trust our feelings because we don't have the wherewithal to be able to dissect the information it's trying to tell us. In my experience, every sensation and feeling that I have has some kind of information that is important and vital to what I need to do next, or what something is trying to say to me right now. But as I've gone through the process, for 15 years, is little by little that ability to dissect what I'm feeling, why I'm feeling it, and what I need to do next has gotten a lot crisper and better. So I do think feelings are an important indication of some type of information that can be useful to us. However, I do know when I'm reacting on impulse in a destructive nature, that is a different thing. When I'm feeling upset and I want to act on it and I feel justified to act on it, and obviously if I do something to somebody else, I'm in trouble. That I don't agree. I think there's a difference between feelings and like an unchecked impulse. I think there's a little bit more distinction there that I think is important.
I think it's semantics, Philip, because what we are talking is being aware of the feeling. That is important. But believe the feeling is what I am talking about.
Yes.
Believe that I am having a good day, or believe that I am having a bad day. If you really go into that rabbit hole, it's dangerous. So one thing is to be aware. Another thing is to believe.
Even in your terms, though, the idea that feeling good means it's a good day, I'm going to suggest that our feelings are mirror images of our thinking, and they are part of our sensory GPS system to give us perspective on what we're thinking. Thinking alone has no perspective because we're always trying to make a point, and a single point has no dimension to it. Feelings are that dimension. They're like the flip side of a coin. You can see the heads, but you know the tail's there, regardless of whether you see it. And feelings give us, I'm going to suggest, when we feel bad, what we're thinking is bad. Then, not some other time, not some historic, in the moment, where we are, where things happen. Everything happens in the present. There's nothing else happening anywhere right now that isn't happening. Nowhere. There's no past or future things are happening in other than in thought. Those are concepts. And if everything's happening, what's happening in terms of our feelings are an indication of our thinking, because it's a bodily function to give us an idea of how well we're doing in the environment and what we're thinking about that environment. If I'm not thinking about the environment I'm in, I'm going to cause fear because my body knows you're not even paying attention to what's happening. You're paying attention to something that isn't happening in an obsessive thought, and I should have a sense of fear. If I try to run from the fear, that's what an addiction is. I'm trying to treat the feeling, to your point, Pedro, I'm trying to treat the feeling as though it's the problem rather than recognizing that it is a reflection. It's like standing in a mirror with a mask on and arguing with the mirror to take the mask off.
Well, I understand what you're saying, Jack. As you know, a few months ago, my house was robbed.
Yes.
The guy was not caught. So I suppose he had a very good feeling about himself when he ran away and was not caught. Oh, great! I did a good hit. But that feeling is truth. Is what will connect him to peace and holiness and all of that. I don't think so. That's where I am coming from.
No, it's reflecting thought. It's not reflecting the absolute nature of reality, because reality doesn't need any thinking. The absolute nature doesn't need thought to confirm it or agree with it or believe in it or have faith in it to exist. It simply exists. And it isn't discounted because we think in discounted ways, and it's not depreciated because we don't appreciate it. It is what it is regardless. So it's reflecting our own thought process.
I agree, but at that time, that thief is feeling good.
I don't know.
Well, I would.
Who knows what he's thinking?
I would argue that he would think momentarily he'd be feeling good, but at some point in the future, those actions that are, how would I say, adverse and actually, they're taking bad actions. Eventually, it will be weighing on his conscience,
He's doing that thing because of the weight on his conscience. He's reduced to doing things that are not virtuous and not healthy and are contrary to other people's interests because of a pressure. That's part of the illness, and that's part of the expression of the mental disease of obsessive thoughts. People that do those things aren't doing it because they're healthy, because if they were, they'd be productive in ways that would benefit other people rather than make believe their only source of benefit is to take more for them by stealing other people's stuff. Those are all fractured states of thought. So the bearing is immediate. It's happening as a result of that, not because of the idea that we can feel better for a moment is exactly what we all did when we picked up a drink. It didn't solve the problem.
But let's continue this. Let's suppose that the guy feels bad.
Yes.
He robbed my house and he left, and he feels, I shouldn't have done that, it's not ethical, whatever, and he's feeling bad. In the same way that I said you cannot trust your feelings, either you feel good or you feel bad, it's because what he doesn't know, what this thief doesn't know, is what is the impact that he has in me for robbing my house. Maybe
why would he run if he didn't know?
No. The impact that he had on me personally.
I understand, but why would he run from you once you were there? He ran, right?
No, Jack. This is, the guy is feeling good or is feeling bad. What I am trying to say is that you cannot trust the feeling of good or the feeling of bad. Yes, it comes from thoughts, but now it's feeling. If he feels bad or if he feels good, has nothing to do with the effect that he has caused on me personally for suffering or for facing that robbery in my house. Maybe in me has done something that has opened something very positive in my own self-liberation. That's what I am saying.
But you're thinking somehow he's completely disconnected by that simply because he's acting in obsessive ways that would include denial and defensiveness to be acting in those defensive ways and defective ways. And I would suggest that if he didn't know better, he wouldn't run and wouldn't think about getting away and wouldn't think getting away from it was part of the success that he was having.
But we're
Is a twisted, diseased thought is going to produce satisfaction in the diseased action, but it's short-lived. And that's exactly what addiction is.
no,
It's
but
it's a temporary hit that gives us the impression we've won, but to Philip's point, eventually it collapses us. The darkness, the weight starts to bear on us. Eventually people fail or they get caught.
I think we are talking about two different things.
Probably many.
I was talking about that you cannot trust your feelings. That the way I feel, that when I ask myself how I'm feeling today, I should be aware of it. I should take that as a piece of information, but I cannot trust it because either, and then was the example of this guy robbing the house. If he feels good or if he feels bad, he doesn't know the effect that he has had in me. And maybe the effect was very positive. And if he knew, he will feel good.
Yeah, and he wouldn't run. He wouldn't try to hide.
Well, I think
before we try and use other people while we have ourselves here, let's look at what we each do as the most evidence that we can quantify in ways that are reliable enough. And again, I would suggest that my feelings, if I make believe my feeling is an indication of how the day is, I'm treating my feeling as something that it isn't. I'm treating my feeling as something exclusive or something that colors everything going on. And that isn't necessarily true. It may be true if I'm relying on it as my lens to see how things are going. But if I'm only relying on how I feel, I'm going to see things only as how I feel and not see things actually as how they're happening, which may not include good things if I'm feeling good. My suspicion is, and again, I want to reinforce this point, that our feelings are accurate assessments of what we're thinking. And it's our body's, what Philip was pointing to, our body's ability to tell us things we may not think we're thinking by offering us perspective and feeling. I could be wrong, but if you start limiting what you're feeling to what you're thinking, you'll start seeing if you choose to hate somebody for a day, I guarantee you, if you commit to that thought, you'll start thinking things about them and feeling things about them that you wouldn't have felt prior to that decision to hate them. And it's very hard to do, by the way, without justification and rationalization. And yet it's super easy to do when we have all that stuff justifying what we're doing, to start having thoughts about other people and see how wrong they are. And then think in ways of all the things we missed about them that were wrong when we weren't paying attention to the hate we have for them that we're using to justify those thoughts and feelings.
Well, one thing I would say, and this may wrap everything together, because it's about interpretation, relying on our interpretation of our feelings. I think what we're talking about here is what, and you said belief. It's like, what are we worshiping today? Are we worshiping our interpretations of what's happening? Are we worshiping money? Are we worshiping this? And are we worshiping women? Are we worshiping fame? Are we worshiping, getting this car that I want or this watch I want? When we're misaligned and we put all our emphasis on worshiping money or worshiping whatever it is, and we start interpreting whatever we're worshiping as the absolute or universal intelligence, or you could say God, we'll eventually get to a point where we'll realize that we've been false in our perspective of what we should worship. I would say, because there's many times you hear stories of so-and-so was so successful, or you can look at and then they got on opiates, or they got on Dilaudid, or they decided to take their lives even though they had everything. I mean, you hear that all the time. I don't understand. It's because what usually is missing is some sense of the absolute, of wholeness, of the feeling that I think all of us in psychology talk about, getting back to the point where we were born and how we felt as a child. If you look at a baby or a child's eyes, you see the wholeness beaming through them. And that's why most people will stop and want to look at a baby or hold a baby, is because that child is not has not gone through the time on this planet where they get misled by the interpretations that they pick up, going to earlier, that they picked up from their parents, or they picked up from their, the familiar ego, or from the societal ego or the cultural ego. And they're not at a point where an adult.
So these are all justifications, Philip.
No, they're all justifications. I guess
They're
what I'm
justifications, though, to suggest that because we are addicted to thinking we don't know that we don't know, and that's a lie. There is no way that we can violate truth and reality in our thinking. No possible way. Can we think we do? Yes. And there again shows how primary thinking seems to be to our experience.
I agree with what Phil said, and especially I like when you said, are we worshipping success or are we worshipping God? And this connects to what I was trying to express before. When you were talking about what we worship, money or car or women, all of those are symbols of success. This is completely, and when you put there, do we worship success or do we worship God? Well, it's very twisted that the story that we've been told is that God tells us that we are worshiping God when we achieve success, that we are good, and the proof that we are good and superior is because we are achieving success that other people do not achieve. One of the intellectual reasons of why in this country we have more rights than the Indians is because we were more developed. We were more successful than them. Therefore, we have the right to their lands. The manifest destiny, philosophy, and all of that hits this on the core. And you nail it, Philip.
So is it true, Santiago, or is it a lie?
Of course it's a lie.
Okay, so if it's a lie, it has no substance. And if we think culture somehow overwhelms truth and reality, we're giving it more substance than it has.
No, but that lie has made our society today.
I know. So do we want to continue that lie, or do we want to begin to recognize that in the ever-present state of our present being, our present awareness, it's a lie? And the idea of perpetuating it by telling it as a story that seems to be intractable because of what everyone else is doing is stripping us of the chance to sit here right now and see that we're contributing to that story by making believe it's so difficult and hard and historic, when in fact it doesn't even, there is no history that's being told other than what we're writing right now in our own conversation and experience.
I think you're in denial, Jack.
I may be. And if there are elements of my thinking that are incorrect, then there are weights I bear as a result of that thinking in terms of depression, in terms of inner conflict. And I certainly have plenty of those to justify your point. At the same time, I become more aware, sort of to your point, Santiago, when you said you started thinking of things, you stopped praying, but started thinking of things more accurately, and you got happier. I would suggest to you that those thoughts that were accurate were your prayers. And in fact, all of our thoughts are our prayers. And when I worship thoughts that are wrong, I end up creating circumstances to solidify the rightness of those wrong thoughts, rather than concede the wrongness of those thoughts and align myself to what I'm doing and have the chance for them to begin to evaporate, rather than consistently resist them with my new story and my new line of reason that I'm going to use in some way that seems so perfectly coiffed, when in fact I'm still struggling internally with the conflict I'm creating. Yes. And ending up using everyone else as justification rather than me. So yes, I am in denial to any degree that I maintain thoughts that aren't true.
Yes, one thing that I learned from you, Jack, is that every thought is a prayer.
Yes.
And that's why today I said I don't pray, but I am praying all the time.
Yes.
catching
Well,
those
and
when I
it also goes to the other side that our present state of awareness is in fact our meditation. It is a knowing self. It is a knowing, not self, but a knowing presence that we are aware of, that we know, that we are aware of, and that we pretend when we're not thinking in those terms, it isn't there, when in fact all that we're doing in those other mistaken terms is preoccupying our attention with a compulsive, obsessive thought that never seems to end because we continue to nurse it over and over and over again by reacting to it because we're repulsed by it. Doesn't chase absolute away. It doesn't chase truth away. It doesn't chase reality away. It chases our opinion into becoming so big and exaggerated that we think it's all there is. And that's a perfect definition of ego.
What you're saying, Jack, it reminds me of the duality of what we're here to do, which is, one, we have to show and explain what it is that people are living in and through, and how they're perceiving reality, and two,
How do you mean what we're here to do, in terms of the conversation or in terms of human experience?
In terms of the conversation.
Okay.
We basically have to hold the mirror up and let that kind of percolate for a time, and then at the same time we have to move on to what it is that's going to lead to a more fulfilling wholeness in our lives and the lives of others. And a lot of it is dissipating those stories and interpretations of things that we thought were the way, and to be able to just discard all that. And then within that sitting, in that breath within ourselves, we start to tap into something that's already been there the whole time. We just forgot because we've been obscured by things. So I think there's always a little bit of a dance between both of those.
Well, and the forgetting is the opposition to forgiveness, and forgiveness is giving things what it's being for, giving things what they are and having things as they are. And this disconnect of making believe that thinking is the final source that's going to bring us back to that place because we're going to start thinking we're back there is the same thinking that tells us we're not there when we're not thinking we're there. And again, shows how primary we utilize. If the thinking that we're using is defective, we're never going to have an experience that tells us we're where we are, while the whole time we are there, we're there. It isn't something that we're going to stop doing, but when you recognize what it is we're doing, the weight of it goes away and the choice to perpetuate it becomes obvious in the ability to say, I don't have to continue thinking. I don't have to keep going in that direction. And then really begin to witness the awareness that we naturally have as being intuitive and start guiding us in directions that we would never go while we were trying to nurse the thought in the right direction to finally arrive at the place that we've always been, thinking it wasn't here.
Yeah, I mean, we're chasing delusions. I mean, obviously, for me, personal experiences that happened lately, and I was with somebody who has chose to chase the delusions of life should be talking about happy things, current events, and the future. Nothing about the past or the present or anything that is uncomfortable. And that was very good information for me to realize that this isn't the right person for me.
He was the right person to give you the option to see. We don't see things in others that we're not doing.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Often, just like feelings give us perspective, those people give us a chance to look at things we're doing that we don't think we're doing. Why would we be drawn to them and someone who is doing things that we think they're doing that we're not doing, if not to be able to begin to see that actually it wouldn't even register in us if we weren't doing it. There'd be nothing there to register.
Yeah, completely. And I think I believe that, yeah, I was doing that. And one of the reasons things happened the way they did in that situation, in that relationship, is because whatever the absolute or God was trying to provide a profound understanding in me that that was not the best way for me. And
but that
whatever
understanding
I
isn't
was,
something, Philip, that comes. God doesn't choose these things for us. If an infinite source has already given us everything, we have the clarity to recognize what's wrong in every breath, at every moment, and whether or not we listen to that. And I would suggest, going back to the feelings, Pedro, that sense of wrong is all we ever need to recognize. We don't need to understand what the thought is that got there, or why I'm feeling wrong, or who it was that did this, that, or those things all just take us on another goose chase. It's the admission of what's happening now is the sum total of all that's happening. And if what I'm feeling is wrong or bad or disturbed, I am thinking something that is simply wrong, bad, or disturbed. I don't need to go any further than that to have a relationship to it that's accurate. And accuracy, just like forgiveness, giving things what they are, dissipates. There's no resentment in that. There's no regret in that. There's nothing dismal about the experience, because I begin to witness my own capacity to make believe that forgetting things is a convenience of denial, and making believe that things aren't happening because I'm pretending I don't remember that I'm doing it. That's a pretty thin veil. That's like looking left and missing my right arm and thinking that somehow my right arm's missing. And yet it's a juvenile attempt to make believe that what's happening isn't happening, because I can deny it and not think it's happening, that's all that's happening. And once again, points to how primary we think thinking is our soul experience and our soul cause and our soul source. It isn't. We wouldn't have any perspective on what's wrong if it was our soul source, because being wrong in our actions would feel right. And we'd think it's the best thing we could be doing, and we would never wear it in any anxiety or stress or depression. It would not show up in those ways. And I don't know anybody that comes and talks to me and says, I'm trying to figure out how to feel worse. There must be some predisposition we're doing that's wrong that gives us that impression so much that we need to think positive thoughts and do positive things and only act in ways that are good, just like you just described. And I would say that's an addiction to the idea that we can escape the feeling by simply treating the feeling rather than looking at the cause, and starting to see that this overuse of thinking has been a misuse of thinking and abuse of thinking, because it's an abnormal approach to using thinking.
Yeah. I was in the car the other day and I was listening to the conversation from, I think it was from last week. And when you're talking about just labeling the thought as thinking bad, like that's why I'm feeling bad. And I was just going through one of those moments where I was feeling down or a little on the depressive side. And for me, again, I don't identify myself with the thoughts that I have in my head, or I try to practice that, not identifying who I am by the thoughts that are in my head. But when I heard you say that on the podcast, and I just labeled my thinking, and that moment, I'm feeling bad because my thinking is bad, it interrupted that conversation in my head, and it actually started to change the feeling tone in my body. And I think that was really important information for me, because one, it stopped the bad feelings, but two, it reminded me, like, this is a practice. Like, anything that has to do with the absolute or spiritual principles or anything like that, it's a practice that we have to arrive to every single day, because it's very easy to get reattached to stories, to interpretations, to worshiping the wrong thing, to all these other things, booby traps that have been agreed upon in the agreement reality of human beings is what is real, which it actually isn't. So in that moment, just being grounded and brought back to this conversation and, just labeling it simply as what it is, when it's the truth, it starts to provide relief, from it.
If what we're doing chronically is paying attention to lies, that's why we don't feel relief. And to think that you're going to stop that when it's one of the possibilities is to start abusing yourself again for doing it, rather than just simply acknowledging what you're doing is obviously wrong in your thinking. So it's easy to identify that who we are is what we think, because we're humans and we're going through episodes and experiences, and we make choices that put those choices and the expectations attached to them at risk. And we may not achieve what we're trying to get to and do and all those things. And those things are future, because we couldn't get to the moon without all the steps in between what it took to get us there. Right? So any effort I take walking down the street is going to include ideas I have about the steps I need to take. The idea that those expectations need to happen exactly as I think they should, when in fact what happens is exactly what happens rather than what I think, is again an indication of how I struggle with the ideas of who I think I am, is my thinking. So the point I'm making to you, Philip, in that oversight is beginning to realize that the absolute nature of our awareness is never changed when we think it's changing. And to think that I'm going to think away these thoughts when those thoughts keep happening is the sense that I need to fight them to stop them, rather than begin to realize they're nothing. Even the idea that I'm chasing delusional thoughts, think of that. If they're delusional, what am I chasing? I'm seeing it as an image of something I'm trying to get to somewhere else than where I am. And if where I am is where everything is happening right now, and everything that exists, as it would be for you and everyone else, then we all have everything right now and have been fighting over who owns it since we got it. And I would say that's a pretty, going back, Pedro, to where this all began historically, my sense is the Bible talked about Cain, God going to Cain and saying, "Where's your brother?" after he killed him. And Cain says, "I don't know." He lied to God, as though God wouldn't know. Whether it's a story of truth or whether it's a story of metaphor, I'm not going to make an opinion on. What happened, happened.
Yeah.
But if we've been relying on those kind of stories and not noticing that a lie was at the core of sin, we've been blaming Eve for eating an apple of knowledge, when in fact it was Cain, her son, that made the first lie and blamed his mom.
But Jack, can you talk a little bit about this thing that you mentioned about paying attention to lies versus, aren't we, all of us, living in a big lie? Is at the of the
We're just thinking we are. We've manifested it like we do on our own lives to justify it as being true, because we rely on our thinking as though it's reality and truth when it isn't. But it doesn't mean, Santiago, that we aren't doing things and acting on things and manifesting things that aren't based on lies. I would say that's largely what human experience has done, or much of what it did in terms of technology would have been beneficial rather than eventually consequential in ways that included pollution and contamination that were always thought not to be there because they weren't as bad as would kill everyone. And thinking that something isn't as bad as would kill you is exactly what an addict thinks when they're shooting another bunch of heroin and thinking, "I'm not going to die. I've done it this far. It's not going to happen to me."
I was going after what Philip said about the booby traps, because I think that is very, very good term, the booby
Yes.
of this thought. But aren't we living in a big booby trap? Is the rules of, from banking to political to everything in that we have created, not a big booby trap?
Well, in terms of being able to use it like we are right now as a justification for not seeing that we still know better than those booby traps we've created, is to see that we are either reactive to those things, which is what the booby trap is. We're either triggering those things, and addiction is a reaction to a reaction to a reaction, but it starts with a repulsion, because a lie for an honest being is repulsive. It is like sour milk the first gulp you take, or rotten meat the first bite you take, or smell. It is repulsive to the body because the body knows something's wrong with it. And when I react to the reaction and begin to take the reaction as anything other than an indication something's wrong, I begin to engage with it as though it's true and real and start going around. I call it fish hooks in my sweater. It's like if I had an alpaca sweater and it was filled with fish hooks, it'd be almost impossible to get them all out. And that stickiness, that sense of glue is my reaction to what's going on, not what's actually happening. I'm reacting to delusion as though it's true and real. And then I keep doing it over and over again. And then I manifest problems in the world like we all have so successfully to justify it's the only thing I can do. And it's hopeless because it's the only thing being done. And I assure you, truth and reality has never been impacted by the global financial situation.
Okay, gentlemen, it's 10:30, and I would like to wrap this because I have a few things to attend. So
we're going to see you in a week. And we'll continue this. I appreciate it. I appreciate the challenge of it. I appreciate the opportunity in it. And in the coming week, let's create a couple of questions that we can thread the next conversation with and also think about in the meantime as just a thread between the conversations that connects them, other than the natural state of intimate connection we all face. We're going to be proactive about it. So do you have one, Pedro? And then we'll let you jump.
well, the first thing I want to say is thank you, Jack, for the opportunity. Thank you, Philip, for sharing this time. And at this moment, I don't have any questions. No.
Anything to think about during the week?
Plenty.
Thanks, Pedro.
How about the state of the world?
I let you know. I normally don't, but if you insist.
No. I just wonder if there would be any thread that you might think about that could be carried into the next conversation. Denial?
I don't know at this point.
Okay.
I will think about it.
All right.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Pedro.
Philip?
What keeps coming to my mind is to think about, or if any, for any of the listeners, including everyone here, is just observation, like awareness. Like, I think getting in the, I think getting into the practice of observation and awareness is really important to this conversation. So I guess my question,
to the knowing presence.
The knowing presence. So I guess my question is, and I hope maybe Pedro will hear this a little bit later, but what are the times this week that we observe getting caught or stuck in the thoughts as who we are or everything, or worshiping those ideas within those thoughts? I'm just curious what those would be and bringing them to the table next week.
So addictive thoughts is what you're...
So addictive thoughts, yeah. And I'm curious if what people, when they go through those, once they identify them as addictive, where does that lead them? Questioning that thought.
So the question of the thought would leave the thought to being the answer, and that would create a new loop of obsessive thinking. But what you said in your experience of hearing whatever you heard that rang true to you is that when you begin considering truth and reality as the basis of your existence, thinking will immediately start straightening out, because all those vaporous issues that are only maintained by the repetitive maintenance of the lie thinking the thinking's going to solve the thinking that created the problem just evaporates, exactly as you described.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
you're asking, how do the thoughts occur? It sounds like.
Yeah, I'm asking to basically observe how they occur, what's people's experience of when they come up, and seeing if they can get back to a level of truth or reality.
Well, can we get away from truth and reality? Maybe the question.
Yeah, that's probably proper.
I mean, I want you to clarify it, but I'm offering that, and not ironically, but in almost every session, that's been one of the questions. How do I stay on the path as though we're off the path? How do I maintain happiness as though we're unhappy? There's a presumption that we're not on the path because we're thinking we're not on the path. And again, it gives thinking this credit as being real and true, as you talked about when you started to disassociate from the idea that your thoughts were who you are. All of a sudden, you had a sense of clarity. If you're thinking accurately, clarity is always going to come. And the expressing of that in the thoughtful manner as a human is how our full capacity for that expression begins to actually function. Doesn't mean that we're any less capable when we're not expressing it. We're just not expressing. It's like putting water in a gas tank. You're going to have poor gas mileage.
So let me be a little more specific in my question, which is,
please.
My question is, what do people observe as the main story?
Well, there's nobody else here to answer that. But what about ask the question for you and let other people listen? Because nobody's going to interact in this live with us other than us, unless we get emails from people, which they're absolutely welcome to do. But from your point of view, what would the question be that others could then benefit from?
I guess for me, my question to myself is, can I be more connected to truth and reality than I am to the stories in my head?
That's very good.
That's my question and goal and practice this week for myself, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's hitting the nail on the head in terms of seeing mentally obsessive thinking as real and true enough to even contest with truth and reality, and how that shift of reliance tends to cause the experience that we're having that is disturbing and depressing and reactive rather than peaceful and whole and solid. There was another point to today, Philip, that I know I jumped in and then Pedro spoke, but I think your thought was cut off. And if you want to retrace your steps, I'd be happy to hear what you were thinking, if you remember.
I think in that particular moment, it was more, I brought it in later, which was the worship idea of how we're worshiping different things. How when we worship other things that are not truth and reality, how that deviates us to have more pain and suffering, basically, eventually.
I would suggest it's the cause of all pain and suffering.
Yeah. It definitely is.
Self-induced, anyhow.
Self-induced. I mean, so I think I did bring it up, the idea, but yeah, I think it's, a lot of people, I mean, Pedro did a great job. I think a lot of people do fall into this thought about success being the ultimate reality or being blessed and all that stuff. But in my experience, I've seen many people who are successful and are completely unhappy or have a situation that they have no idea how to deal with. They're completely powerless over. And it's a very rude awakening when they realize that no matter how successful they've been, they don't have the tools or ability to help a loved one in a particular situation, or they learn for themselves, they're still at the same place of feeling empty and alone that they were when they thought if they achieved all this stuff, they would feel the opposite of empty and alone. So, that just brings me back to the idea of love. And, I remember from the conversation before and, in the conversations weekly is like, when I connect and I'm in love within myself, I guess now let me bring in this idea. So the success and all that stuff, I've learned conversely that when I'm responsible, my higher power ends up giving me more responsibilities. Now, whether that looks like success to the outside world is their interpretation or not. However, for me, I feel success is when I'm giving more responsibilities to expand and grow my responsibilities purely. So I notice when I'm worshiping, a God or a higher power or something, usually because I'm on that, usually allows me the ability and the wherewithal, and most of all the space to take on more responsibilities. So that was kind of the point.
Well, and your capacity, when you're responsible in your actions, you're responsible in your thoughts, because all human action is based on thought. All human voluntary action is based on thought.
Mhm.
And if your nature is responsible, you don't become irresponsible because you act irresponsibly. You're simply not expressing your nature. And the
Say that
clarity,
one more time.
you don't become irresponsible in your essence because you act irresponsibly, or there wouldn't be a distinction. You can act irresponsibly by not expressing your responsible nature, which is what qualifies irresponsibility from being irresponsible. It isn't because it isn't something we can do, because in this freedom of choice, we can do anything we want, including what's wrong, and make believe it's right. So the fulfillment, as you admitted and conceded and recognized, is that when I act in ways that are aligned with how I am responsibly, because I'm thinking responsibly, because I'm not relying on irresponsible thoughts that are defective lies, making believe they're truth, and I'm going to get better by trying to figure out how to fix the lies, rather than just concede, if I'm lying, I'm disturbed, and that's the end of it, period. Now I'm open to that freedom of awareness that you described you had in the car when you heard something and bam, it hit. It snapped. That truth isn't something you're being told. It's something you know and have pretended to have forgotten because of a marriage to this idea that the idol in your life is what you think, which is ego. And it's exactly what the Bible talks about in terms of idolatry and having no other gods before me and all that kind of stuff. Having no other gods before me suggests that there are other gods that we have. That it's just when we put them first, compared to realizing that an absolute source is absolutely an absolute source, it begins to conflict in our own thinking because we know better, or it wouldn't be a conflict. Conflict would be normal enough to have us feel fulfilled by it if it were in fact the nature of our existence. And it does not seem to be that way. Could be, I could be wrong, but my experience with people is that they don't suffer from truth. And they don't suffer from reality, and they don't suffer from love. They tend to suffer from what they like and what they think should be, rather than what's actually happening. And what's happening is really metaphoric for all that we share and all that we have and all that we've been given. And the fact that everything that's happening everywhere, right this moment, wherever you are, even if it's not exactly when this was taped, you are where you are, listening with all you have and everything that's happening as it's happening, without any distinction or division or lack of clarity, except to the thinking you're doing about it. And that begins to identify the source of the problem, I would suggest, and talking about it helps us see it quicker, so that we can begin saying, oh, I know what I'm doing. It's not that I can't be doing it. It's not that I shouldn't be doing it. If I'm doing it, it's not a matter of whether I should be or not. It's a matter of I'm doing it. And obviously, I'm relying on something that I developed that gave me the impression that it was so true and real. All I ever have to do is rely on it, especially when I get a little overwhelmed or a little challenged by circumstances, and I begin to default to ways of operating because I'm not quite sure what to do. Rather than take a deep breath, I start acting and reacting and say, oh, I'm just reacting. Okay, I can admit that. If I'm doing it, doesn't matter whether I admit it or not, I'm doing it. When I start simply acknowledging what I'm doing, all of a sudden the impact and the stickiness and the glue seems to dissipate. And the smoky image that's a foggy notion just evaporates. It's not there. It's never been there, except to the chronic nature of thinking. It's there. It's something I need to do within thinking to finally fix it.
Yeah, when I accept what is, things usually tend to right itself.
Well, and keep in mind that when you don't accept things as they are, they're already right. You just don't think they are. That's all. You don't even need to. The real freedom here comes from beginning to see that you don't even need to accept them for them to be as they are. And the ridiculous nature of us thinking that thinking is the determinant becomes obvious when you begin to realize that I can even oppose them and deny them and be delusional about them. And they haven't changed at all. They're still happening exactly as they're happening. then it becomes even more ridiculous because we're not seeing it as something that's up to us to do, but seeing that what's happening is happening regardless of what we do. And now that's multiplying something that seems very heavy by 0, and it vanishes.
Yeah.
Nothing there.
Well, Jack, thank you for having me. I have to jump on a work call, but
Love
yeah,
you,
I
brother.
look forward to next week.
Thank you very much. Talk to you during the week.
All right, talk to you then. Bye.
Thank you all for joining us and being with us today.